In 1998, the oncology unit at Cheltenham Hospital had an extension built which gave the haematology department 8 ensuite rooms. This was the first time that we'd had dedicated haematology beds, and it allowed us to do stem cell transplants on patients with leukemia and other cancers. It soon became apparent that these patients needed some financial help. They were often brought into hospital with very little notice whatsoever and were faced with having several weeks, even months, being an inpatient in isolation. So we started giving financial aid to patients to help with travel expenses, general expenses at home, whatever. If you're the breadwinner and you suddenly come into hospital, it can create enormous difficulties. From then, we've gone on to fund a dedicated haematology outpatient department in Cheltenham Hospital, and more recently put an extension and refurbished the Edward Jenner unit in Gloucester Hospital, creating a county-wide haematology day unit facility. We're also interested in research, and we fund the Robert Dalton Leukaemia Research Fellow, who's a postgraduate student studying for either a PhD or MSc in a leukemia-related subject. This is in memory of my co-founder and colleague, Dr. Robert Dalton, who very sadly lost his life to cancer at the age of 49. We are also aware that when patients are faced with really intensive chemotherapy, they need some psychological help. They don't have mental illness, as some people might associate psychologists with, but they need help to cope with the stress that is created through their disease and their treatment. At the moment, Linc funds a clinical psychologist for 2 sessions a week, and the Hospital Trust do fund 2 further sessions, but this is nowhere near enough for the demand and the number of patients that need to be seen. So our next hope is that we can fund a full-time clinical psychologist to work with our haematology patients in both Cheltenham and Gloucester hospitals. The Leukaemia and Intensive Chemotherapy Fund provides help to patients during their long stay in hospital and also when they go home. Whilst they're inpatients, as we've said, we provide all the equipment they require on the ward. It's very difficult being in isolation for many weeks. You may feel too ill to talk, you may feel too ill to want to read or anything like that. Your vision might not be particularly good at the time. So by having a nice large television and a DVD, you can watch whatever films you like. We would hope at some point to be able to have email facilities for all our patients. They can get very very sore mouths, and I think even talking is difficult. So to be able to email your friends to make contact with the outside world would be an enormous benefit. This is proving difficult because of the hospital firewall, but we do hope we're going to overcome that difficulty very shortly. In order to provide all the equipment that's needed both in their isolation rooms and on the ward in general, we do a lot of fundraising to raise this money. We also maintain the day unit on the treatment ward in Cheltenham by having a nice comfy sofa bed. Some patients relatives wish to stay overnight when their loved one is very ill, and we keep this up to date with new equipment and make sure it's decorated regularly. And there are games in there for children and all sorts of things like that.
The Edward Jenner unit was originally built 20 years ago to provide an outpatient facility for the care of haematology patients locally. 3 years ago, Linc set up an appeal to provide funds for the refurbishment and extension of that unit, now the Linc Edward Jenner unit. This facility, which opened at the end of last year, provides a county-wide daycare facility for all haematology patients receiving chemotherapy for leukemia, blood transfusion and associated treatments, including patients who've recently been discharged from hospital following bone marrow transplant and intensive chemotherapy for leukemia. The facility has state-of-the-art equipment and a dedicated nursing team, and is a wonderful facility now for our patients across the county.
I was feeling unwell for a couple of weeks with a sore throat, and it got to a stage where my throat became very swollen, so I went to the GP and she referred me to Gloucester Hospital. Once in there, I had a blood test done, and it diagnosed the reason why I wasn't fighting the infection was that I had leukemia. I was then sent straight over to Cheltenham Hospital, where bone marrow test was done, which confirmed the diagnosis. The following week, I was put into a side room in isolation, where the chemotherapy treatment started, and it lasted over a period of 5 months. I had 3 cycles of chemotherapy. While in that room, the Linc supported me by providing a lot of the equipment in the room. There was a flat screen television, DVD player, which was very important as contact with the outside world. My concentration levels were very low. I couldn't read books and keep concentration, so it was vital to have that ability to have a television. A fridge was provided so you could keep your cold drinks at hand, and you feel very up and down during the treatment, and they provided a exercise bicycle in the room as well, so that gives you something to do when you felt up to it.
The Leukaemia and Intensive Chemotherapy Fund doesn't just treat patients diagnosed with cancer. Of course, people having treatment are a huge priority to us, but so are their families and their friends. Our support helps in various ways, both physical and psychological. We can give financial support and psychological support through our clinical psychologist. Our Leukaemia Research Fellow is looking at ways of better treatment and better diagnosis, and who knows, she may come up with some groundbreaking initiative that will help many people around the world. Although based in Cheltenham Hospital, we support patients from Gloucestershire, Herefordshire and South Worcestershire, and we are continually looking at ways to improve patients' stay both as an inpatient and as an outpatient, and to improve their care so that their treatment is a gold star standard. Anything that people can do to help us will always be greatly appreciated.